wife, broil me a couple of these for breakfast. Here, wife. Here, wife. Here, wife.
Here, wife.
Here, wife. Here, wife. Here, wife. Ah.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Changeling Tales. So in today's video we'll be taking a look at a rather prominent or famous fairy tale called Jack and the Beanstalk. I'm not sure how far abroad this story has reached. If you grew up in the UK or in North America, you've probably heard it in one version or another. But this story definitely isn't the only one about a young lad stealing stuff from giants or ogres. Stories like these, or with that theme, have been around for thousands of years, dating all the way back to Greek and Roman mythology. So, nothing new here. Interestingly, this story has survived in two prominent versions. If you grew up, again, in the UK or in North America, you would have grown up with one of these two versions. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about why both versions exist, how they're different, why they're different, that sort of thing. So the first one, or the one that was recorded earlier, was written by or recorded by Benjamin Tabart? You know me in pronunciation by this time, I suck at it. Anyway, he published Jack and the Beanstalk in one of the popular variations in 1807, and the other popular variation that has stood the test of time was written or recorded by Joseph Jacobs in 1890. So if we go back to turn of the century, 1700s to 1800s, there was actually a rather interesting movement that took place during that time that in a way reflects the current movement happening around fairy tales and folk tales. So during Benjamin Tabart's time, in 1807, fairy tales actually were being knowingly adjusted or altered to suit the audience, to suit the society of the time. And the ways in which these stories were being altered was they were being imbued, forcefully rewritten with a strong sense of morality. And you would see in stories rewritten and retold through this time, it was often tied up in religion as well. Religion comes up in a lot of versions of stories from that time. But with Jack and the Beanstalk, it was just plain punch you in the face morality. So previous to 1807, when Jack and the Beanstalk was still just an oral tradition story, it was a lot more like the version by Joseph Jacobs. Joseph Jacobs, when talking about his version, his retelling of Jack and the Beanstalk, said that this was the version that my parents told me and that their parents before them told them. This is the version I know and grew up with. And it definitely is more vague in terms of its morality. So in the version by Benjamin Tabart, Jack climbs up the beanstalk, but instead of going straight to the house or castle of the giant ogre, whoever, he actually meets a fairy first, and this fairy tells him, Jack, that castle up there, that was your father's. That ogre who's living in it now, he actually came and killed your father and all your siblings, and you and your mother were the only people who managed to escape, and you've been living down on Earth. They're up in fairyland, I guess, now. Talking to the fairy. Anyway, so the ogre killed your family. Now it's your duty to go steal back the giant stuff because it was all stolen from you and your family and your father anyway, so steal all of your stuff back and defeat the giant and free the people. So in that sense, it gives Jack a sense of, like, he's doing the right thing. It becomes a moral justice story in that there's motivation for him to do the things he does. Whereas in Joseph Jacobs' version, his retelling, there is no fairy that comes along and explains everything to him. As far as the reader or listener knows, Jack just climbed up the beanstalk and started taking this guy's stuff and then, let him decease. Let the ogre, giant, whoever, decease. So, that was probably grammatically incorrect. I don't know if I care. Anyway. Many scholars through the 1800s and into the 1900s believed Joseph Jacobs' version to be superior, thinking that, for one thing, it was the more authentic in that it was closer to the orally told, passed down over the generations version, that it wasn't tampered with so that there would be a clear moral in the story, or so that Jack would seem like a moral character. A lot of scholars actually argued that the version by Joseph Jacobs, where Jack doesn't seem to have, moral grounds for stealing stuff from the giant, is actually the better moral story, because it asks the listener, kids, whoever the audience, to think about Jack's actions, and to think for themselves, wait a minute, so this guy is the hero, fine, but wasn't the things he did kind of nasty? Like, I don't know if this guy is so good, So they valued Joseph Jacobs' Jack and the Beanstalk for not being so spoon-feeding, preachy, kind of moral meh. I'm not sure where I was going with that sentence, but anyway, the version I'll be reading today is the one by Joseph Jacobs. I decided on that one because it is theoretically more authentic to the older version of the tale, and also I like that it leaves it up to the audience to question Jack's actions, whether or not what he did was right, or I guess whether or not he should have done that. I like that it allows the listener to actually think about things instead of just, hear morality on a silver platter. Because that's what writers do. That's what they did back in 1807. So yeah, those are the two main versions. Now there was just one more kind of unrelated point that I wanted to make about this story, and that's the fact that one of the versions, Tabar's version, actually ends in a very unique way. Pretty much every fairy tale, every folk tale you read, if the main character is of a marriageable age, they get married at the end. And there may not be any plot leading up to that. Most of the time it just seems really randomly thrown in, like in the last sentence for some reason. You're just kind of sitting there like, why? At least I do most of the time. But in Tabar's version of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jack does not marry at the end. Instead, he just returns home to his mother and they prosper and live on and whatever. And there's no mention of marriage. And that is very, very, very unique. There's only one other story I can think of, one other version of one other story I can think of where it doesn't end in marriage, and that's a Russian story, Vasilisa the Beautiful. In one of those versions, she doesn't marry. She just returns home again to her father and they live happily ever after. But that's a different story. Point is, everybody always getting married at the end of these stories. Probably just a continuation of the status quo, of that being just what people did with their lives. Just, you get married and then the rest of your life is just ever after. Anyway, now I'm rambling. I do that a lot. I think that's all I wanted to say about this story. I'm probably going to think of something else later because I always do. But for now, that is all. So, on to the story. Jack and the Beanstalk. There was once upon a time a poor widow who had an only son named Jack and a cow named Milky White, and all they had to live on was the milk the cow gave every morning, which they carried to the market and sold. But one morning Milky White gave no milk, and they didn't know what to do. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" said the widow, wringing her hands. "Cheer up, mother. I'll go and get work somewhere," said Jack. "We've tried that before. Nobody would take you," said his mother. "We must sell Milky White and with the money start shop or something." "All right, mother," says Jack. "It's market day today, and I'll soon sell Milky White, and then we'll see what we can do." So he took the cow's halter in his hand, and off he started. He hadn't gone far when he met a funny-looking old man, who said to him, "Good morning, Jack." "Good morning to you," said Jack, and wondered how he knew his name. "Well, Jack, and where are you off to?" said the man. "I'm going to market to sell our cow here." "Oh, you look the proper sort of chap to sell cows," said the man. "I wonder if you know how many beans make 5. 2 in each hand and 1 in your mouth," says Jack, as sharp as a needle. "Right you are," says the man. "And here they are, the very beans themselves." He went on, pulling out of his pockets a number of strange-looking beans. "As you are so sharp," says he, "I don't mind doing a swap with you. Your cow for these beans." "Go along," says Jack. "Wouldn't you like it?" "Ah, you don't know what these beans are," said the man. "If you plant them overnight, by morning they grow right up to the sky." "Really?" said Jack. "You don't say so." "Yes, that is so, and if it doesn't turn out to be true, you can have your cow back." "Right," says Jack, and hands him over Milky White's halter and pockets the beans. Back goes Jack home, and as he hadn't gone very far, it wasn't dusk by the time he got to his door. "Back already, Jack?" said his mother. "I see you haven't got Milky White, so you've sold her. How much did you get for her?" "You'll never guess, mother," says Jack. "No, you don't say so. Good boy, 5 pounds, 10, 15. No, it can't be 20. I told you couldn't guess. What do you say to these beans? They're magical. Plant them overnight and—" "What?" says Jack's mother. "Have you been such a fool, such a dolt, such an idiot as to give away my Milky White, the best milker in the parish, and prime beef to boot for a set of paltry beans? Take that! Take that! Take that! And as for your precious beans, here they go out the window. And now off with you to bed. Not a sup shall you drink, and not a bit shall you swallow this very night." So Jack went upstairs to his little room in the attic, and sad and sorry he was, to be sure, as much for his mother's sake as for the loss of his supper. At last he dropped off to sleep. When he woke up, the room looked so funny. The sun was shining into part of it, and yet all the rest was quite dark and shady. So Jack jumped up and dressed himself and went to the window. And what do you think he saw? Why, the beans his mother had thrown out of the window into the garden had sprung up into a big beanstalk, which went up and up and up till it reached the sky. So the man spoke truth after all. The beanstalk grew up quite close past Jack's window, so all he had to do was to open it and give a jump onto the beanstalk, which ran up just like a big ladder. So Jack climbed, and he 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 climbed, till at last he reached the sky. And when he got there, he found a long, broad road going as straight as a dart. So he walked along, and he walked along, and he walked along, till he came to a great big tall house. On the doorstep was a great big tall woman. "Good morning, mum," says Jack, quite polite-like. "Could you be so kind as to give me some breakfast?" For he hadn't had anything to eat, you know, the night before, and was as hungry as a hunter. "It's breakfast you want, is it?" says the great big tall woman. "It's breakfast you'll be if you don't move off from here. My man is an ogre, and there's nothing he likes better than boys broiled on toast. You'd better be moving on, or he'll soon be coming." "Oh, please, Mum, do give me something to eat, Mum. I've had nothing to eat since yesterday morning, really and truly, mum, says Jack. I may as well be broiled as die of hunger. Well, the ogre's wife was not half so bad after all, so she took Jack into the kitchen and gave him a junk of bread and cheese and a jug of milk. But Jack hadn't half finished these when thump, thump, thump. The whole house began to tremble with the noise of someone coming. Oh, goodness gracious me, it's my old man, said the ogre's wife. What on earth shall I do? Come along quick and jump in here. And she bundled Jack into the oven just as the ogre came in. He was a big one, to be sure. At his belt he had 3 calves strung up by the heels, and he unhooked them and threw them down on the table and said, Here, wife, boil me a couple of these for breakfast. Ah, what's this I smell? Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll have his bones to grind by bread. Nonsense, dear, said his wife. You're dreaming. Or perhaps you smell the scraps of that little boy you liked so much for yesterday's dinner. Here, you go and have a wash and tidy up, and by the time you come back, your breakfast will be ready for you. So off the ogre went, and Jack was just going to jump out of the oven and run away when the woman told him not. Wait till he's asleep, says she. He always has a doze after breakfast. Well, the ogre had his breakfast, and after that he goes to a big chest and takes out of it a couple of bags of gold, and down he sits and counts till at last his head began to nod, and he began to snore till the whole house shook again. Then Jack crept out on tiptoe from his oven, and as he was passing the ogre he took one of the bags of gold under his arm, and off he pelters till he came to the beanstalk, and then he threw down the bag of gold, which, of course, fell into his mother's garden, and then he climbed down till at last he got home, and told his mother, and showed her the gold, and said, Well, mother, wasn't I right about the beans? They are really magical, you see? So they lived on the bag of gold for some time, but at last they came to the end of it, and Jack made up his mind to try his luck once more up at the top of the beanstalk. So one fine morning he rose up early and got onto the beanstalk, and he climbed 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 till at last he came out on the road again and up to the great big tall house he had been to before. There, sure enough, was the great big tall woman a-standing on the doorstep. Good morning, mum, says Jack as bold as brass. Could you be so good as to give me something to eat? Go away, my boy, said the big tall woman, or else my man will eat you up for breakfast. But aren't you the youngster who came here once before? Do you know that very day my man missed one of his bags of gold? That's strange, mum, said Jack. I dare say I could tell you something about that, but I'm so hungry I can't speak till I've had something to eat. Well, the big tall woman was so curious that she took him in and gave him something to eat. But he had scarcely begun munching it as slowly as he could, when thump, 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 they heard the giant's footstep, and his wife hid Jack away in the oven. All happened as it did before. In came the ogre as he did before, said, Fee, fi, fo, fum, and had his breakfast of 3 broiled oxen. Then he said, Wife, bring me the hen that lays the golden eggs. So she brought it, and the ogre said, Lay. And it laid an egg all of gold. And then the ogre began to nod his head and to snore till the house shook. Then Jack crept out of the oven on tiptoe and caught hold of the golden hen, and was off before you could say Jack Robinson. But this time the hen gave a cackle which woke the ogre, and just as Jack got out of the house he heard him calling, Wife, wife, what have you done with my golden hen? And the wife said, Why, my dear? But that was all Jack heard, for he rushed off to the beanstalk and climbed down like a house on fire. And when he got home he showed his mother the wonderful hen and said, Lay, to it. And it laid a golden egg every time he said, Lay. Well, Jack was not content, and it wasn't very long before he determined to have another try at his luck up there at the top of the beanstalk. So one fine morning he rose up early and got on to the beanstalk, and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed till he got to the top. But this time he knew better than to go straight to the ogre's house. And when he got near it, he waited behind a bush till he saw the ogre's wife come out with a pail to get some water, and then he crept into the house and got into the copper. He hadn't been there long when he heard thump, 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 as before, and in come the ogre and his wife. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, cried out the ogre. I smell him, wife, I smell him. Do you, my dearie? Says the ogre's wife. Then if it's that little rogue that stole your gold and the hen that laid the golden eggs, he's sure to have got into the oven. And they both rushed to the oven, but Jack wasn't there, luckily, and the ogre's wife said, There you are again with your fee-fi-fo-fum. Why, of course it's the boy you caught last night that I've just broiled for your breakfast. How forgetful I am, and how careless you are not to know the difference between live and dead after all these years. So the ogre sat down to the breakfast and ate it, but every now and then he would mutter, Well, I could have sworn. And he'd get up and search the larder and the cupboards and everything, only luckily he didn't think of the copper. After breakfast was over, the ogre called out, Wife, wife, bring me my golden harp. So she brought it and put it on the table before him. Then he said, Sing. And the golden harp sang most beautifully, and it went on singing till the ogre fell asleep and commenced to snore like thunder. Then Jack lifted up the copper lid very quietly and got down like a mouse and crept on hands and knees till he came to the table, when up he crawled, caught hold of the golden harp, and dashed with it toward the door. But the harp called out quite loud, Master! Master! And the ogre woke up just in time to see Jack running off with his harp. Jack ran as fast as he could, and the ogre came rushing after, and would soon have caught him, only Jack had a start, and dodged him a bit, and knew where he was going. When he got to the beanstalk, the ogre was not more than 20 yards away when suddenly he saw Jack disappear and when he came to the end of the road, he saw Jack underneath climbing down for dear life. Well, the ogre didn't like trusting himself to such a ladder, and he stood and waited, so Jack got another start. But then the harp cried out, Master! Master! And the ogre swung himself down to the beanstalk, which shook with his weight. Down climbs Jack, and after him climbed the ogre. By this time Jack had climbed down and climbed down and climbed down till he was very nearly home, so he called out, Mother! Mother, bring me an axe! Bring me an axe! And his mother came rushing out with the axe in her hand, but when she came to the beanstalk she stood stock still with fright, for there she saw the ogre with his legs just through the clouds. But Jack jumped down and got hold of the axe, and gave a chop at the beanstalk which cut it half in two. The ogre felt the beanstalk shake and quiver, so he stopped to see what was the matter. Then Jack gave another chop with the axe, and the beanstalk was cut in two, and began to topple over. Then the ogre fell down, and broke his crown, and the beanstalk came toppling after. Then Jack showed his mother his golden harp, and what with showing that and selling the golden eggs, Jack and his mother became very rich, and he married a great princess, and they lived happily ever after.